All right, let's dive into what is maybe the single biggest economic mystery in all of human history. For almost our entire existence, humanity was, well, stuck, economically speaking. Then, in what was basically the blink of an eye, everything changed. So how did that happen, and why? That's what we're here to figure out. To really get this, let's start with a number: $150. Now, according to the economist Bradford DeLong, this was pretty much the average income per person for almost all of human history, when you adjusted for today's money. It doesn't matter if you were a hunter-gatherer a million years ago or a farmer in the year 1300. Your day-to-day economic reality was basically identical.
And this timeline, wow, it just says it all, doesn't it? For hundreds of thousands of years, it is just a dead flat line, stagnation. Then, right around 1750, boom, you see this insane, near vertical takeoff in prosperity that just keeps on going. This isn't just a little bit of growth, it is an absolute explosion.
So what was it? What lit the fuse on this economic rocket ship? What single event could possibly be powerful enough to completely shatter a pattern that had held strong for a million years?
The answer, of course, is the Industrial Revolution. This was the moment we finally figured out how to use mechanical power, think steam engines, to make things. We broke free from the natural limits of human and animal muscle, and for the very first time in history, we started to see real, sustained, long-run economic growth.
Okay, but this global revolution didn't just pop up everywhere at once. It had a very specific starting point, a small island nation. And that brings us to the next piece of our puzzle. Why England? What was so special about that place at that time?
Well, Nobel laureate Douglas North had a really interesting theory. He argued it wasn't a resource like coal or a single invention that kicked it all off. No, it was a political event. It all started with the Glorious Revolution, which put Parliament in charge instead of the king. This then led to an independent court system, and this is the crucial part, the protection of private property. For the very first time, entrepreneurs felt safe. They knew that if they invested in some big, risky new idea, the government couldn't just come in and take all their profits. And that security, that created the perfect environment for innovation to flourish.
So a political revolution sparked an industrial one. Got it. But now it's time to pop the hood and see how this growth engine actually works. What are the gears and pistons inside that are actually driving all this prosperity forward?
If you really want to understand how a society gets richer, you only need to remember two words: labor productivity. It's really just a simple measure of the amount of stuff one worker can produce in a given amount of time, say an hour. If you want to make a country wealthier, you have to find a way to make its workers more productive. It's really that simple.
And how do you do that? Well, fundamentally, there are two ways you can go about it. On one side, you can give workers more capital, so more tools, more machines, better factories. And on the other side, you can give them better technology, smarter tools, brand new inventions, or just more efficient ways of organizing the work they're already doing.
Let's see how this actually plays out. Imagine we give a worker an extra $25 worth of machinery. We get a pretty nice boost in their output, an extra $5 worth of goods per hour. Great, right?
But now, what happens when we add another $25 of capital? This time, the output only goes up by $4. This is what economists call the law of diminishing returns. Think about it. The very first tractor on a farm is a total revolution. The 10th tractor? It's just a small improvement. You can't get rich forever just by piling up more of the same old tools.
And this is why technology is the real game changer. It doesn't just move you along that curve of diminishing returns. It actually shifts the entire curve up. A new invention or a new process like the just-in-time assembly line means you can produce way more stuff with the exact same amount of capital. That's the secret sauce to sustained long-term growth.
The economist Joseph Schumpeter had this amazing phrase for this whole process. He called it creative destruction. The automobile was a creation, right? But it completely destroyed the horse and buggy industry. The smartphone destroyed the market for GPS devices, for digital cameras, you name it. It's this constant, messy, churning cycle of innovation that really propels an economy forward.
So this brings us to the next really big mystery. If we have the recipe for growth, stable government, property rights, capital, technology, then why hasn't every country used it? In theory, poor countries should actually be growing the fastest because they can just copy the technology and the institutions that already work in richer countries. And you know what? If we only look at the world's high-income countries, this catch-up theory works perfectly. You can see here that places like Ireland and South Korea, which were relatively poor back in 1960, grew much, much faster than the United States did. They were closing the gap. But here's the twist. The moment we zoom out and look at all the countries in the world, the catch-up model completely falls apart. Many of the world's poorest countries have seen almost no growth at all. It's like the engine works, we know it works, but for some reason, they just can't get it started. Why not? So why can't they get the engine started? Well, economists point to 4 massive roadblocks. First, a failure to enforce the rule of law. I mean, if you can't be sure your property is safe or that a contract will be honored, you're just not going to invest. Then there's wars and revolutions, which obviously destroy stability. Third, poor public health and education, which leads to a workforce that just can't be productive. And finally, low rates of saving and investment, which often happens when people don't trust the financial system. Once you understand these barriers, the path forward becomes a whole lot clearer. And make no mistake, the stakes for getting this right are unbelievably high.
Just look at Nigeria and Turkey. Back in 1960, they had very similar income levels. But then look what happens over the next 50-something years. Turkey grew at a pretty solid 2.7% per year, while Nigeria barely grew at all. And the result? A massive, massive gap in wealth. But this isn't just about having nicer cars. This is literally life and death. In the poorest, slowest growing countries, the rates of infant mortality are over 25 times higher than in rich countries. These small differences in growth rates have absolutely enormous human consequences. So when you put it all together, the solutions start to look like a direct mirror of the problems. The pro-growth policy checklist becomes pretty clear. A country that wants to get rich must enforce property rights. It must invest in the health and education of its people. It has to be open to foreign investment and new technology. And it should create policies that encourage its own citizens to save and invest for the future.
So there you have it. We have the recipe for prosperity. We know what it takes to lift entire nations out of poverty. But this leads to what might be the most challenging question of all. In a world with finite resources, with a changing climate, is this engine of endless growth a miracle, or is it a curse? That's the question we're all going to have to answer.